Today, we are diving into one of the most wild, transformative, and just plain contradictory eras in American history, the Gilded Age. This was a time of unbelievable progress, of staggering new fortunes, but it was also a time of deep, deep conflict that would really shape the nation for the next 100 years. So let's jump right in. Our story kicks off in the bitter cold of February 1897. We're inside New York's brand new, incredibly opulent Waldorf Hotel. The absolute cream of society is throwing one of the most lavish parties the country has ever seen. But here's the thing. Outside those gilded walls, a totally different reality was taking shape. As one minister warned, this growing gap between the city's rich and its poor was creating a tension so thick you could literally feel it in the air. And just get a load of this number. That one single night of partying cost what it would take to feed nearly 1,000 working-class families for an entire year. Let that sink in. It's a single fact that just perfectly captures the core conflict of the Gilded Age. This spectacular, unbelievable wealth being created right alongside desperate, grinding poverty. So, to really get a handle on this era, we have to start by looking at these deep divisions. It really was a tale of two Americas, living right next to each other. You know, the name of the era itself, the Gilded Age, tells you so much. As the historian Nell Irvin Painter puts it, gilded is not the same as golden. It's this idea of a thin, shiny layer of gold on the outside that's covering up something, well, something far less valuable, or maybe even rotten underneath. It is the perfect metaphor for a time that looked amazing on the surface, but was hiding some really deep social problems. And this chart, wow, this really puts that rot in stark terms. Just look at the insane disparity. By the end of this period, the richest 4,000 families, we're talking less than 1% of the population, had piled up almost as much wealth as the other 11.6 million families combined. That's not just a wealth gap, it's a Grand Canyon. So, who was building this new America? And who was reaping these incredible rewards? Well, let's meet the new American Titans. You have to understand, the world was changing at lightning speed. Before this, America was really just a collection of local economies. But then, this trio of innovations comes along and changes everything. First, railroads stitched the country together, creating huge national markets for the first time. Then, mass production allows factories to pump out goods with incredible efficiency. And finally, a new class of managers shows up who can organize these gigantic operations on a scale nobody had ever dreamed of. And all this new industry created a ton of new money, which, naturally, crashed headfirst into the old social order. The old money elite, they valued quiet, understated elegance. But the new money industrialists? Oh no. People like Alva Vanderbilt used these spectacular, in-your-face displays of wealth, building literal French palaces on Fifth Avenue, to basically force their way to the top of the social ladder. And it's really important to get this. The men who mastered these new systems, guys like Andrew Carnegie in steel or J.P. Morgan in finance, they weren't always the inventors. They were the organizers. They were geniuses at taking sprawling, chaotic industries and consolidating them into massive, ruthlessly efficient corporations. And in the process, they amassed personal power and wealth on a scale that was just unimaginable before them. But for every titan's fortune, there were millions of workers and farmers who felt like they were being absolutely crushed by this new system. And pretty soon, they started to organize and fight back. And this wasn't just quiet grumbling. This resistance absolutely exploded across the country. Sometimes it was political, like Henry George's campaign in New York. Other times it was downright violent, like the bloody Homestead strike against Carnegie's steel empire. And when the Panic of 1893 hit and triggered a brutal depression, unemployed workers even marched on Washington in what they called Coxey's Army, demanding that the government do something to create jobs. Now, the anger was especially raw out in farm country. Fiery orators like Mary Elizabeth Lease gave voice to a brand new political movement, the Populists. They looked at the system and saw something totally rigged by Eastern banks and railroads. They argued that the government no longer served the people, but only the money men on Wall Street. All this anger, all this unrest, it was all boiling over and building towards one single, massive event that felt like it would decide the future of the country, the presidential election of 1896. The battle lines for this election could not have been clearer. On one side, you had Republican William McKinley. He was backed by big business, the banks, and he championed the gold standard, a system that kept money valuable. which is great if you're a lender. And on the other side, you had Democrat William Jennings Bryan, leading this huge coalition of farmers and laborers who were demanding currency reform to make it easier to pay off their crushing debts. It was a direct showdown between two completely different Americas. And Bryan, wow, he captured the whole spirit of this movement with one of the most famous speeches in American history. His Cross of Gold speech turned the election into a moral crusade. He wasn't just talking about economics. He was saying that the gold standard was literally crucifying the working people of America. It electrified millions of people. But in the end, it wasn't enough. McKinley and his corporate backers just massively outspent Bryan. And crucially, that grand coalition that Bryan was hoping for, the one between the farmers in the West and the factory workers in the cities, it never really came together. The forces of organized capital won the day. So the Battle of 1896 was over. But the Gilded Age? Well, it left behind the blueprint for the modern world we live in now, and it baked in conflicts that we are still dealing with today. I mean, really think about it. The Gilded Age basically built the America we recognize. It established the modern corporation as the main engine of our economy. It turned the U.S. into a global industrial giant. And it cemented a system where most of us work for a wage. But it also locked in this fundamental, permanent tension between the immense power of concentrated wealth and the democratic ideal of one person, one vote. And that really leads us to the ultimate takeaway from this whole era. The Gilded Age forged the fundamental question that has echoed through American life ever since. When the interests of massive wealth clash with the interests of ordinary citizens, who does the government actually represent? That was a central question they were wrestling with back then, and if we're being honest, it's a question we are still trying to answer today.